Chapter 6. So, I told my aunt and uncle about my Ouija board experience in the pyramid thing, and they thought it was pretty cool. And I don't remember if they told my family or I told my family, but that really upset them. They started accusing me of practicing witchcraft, and it turned into this big negative thing. And then I went back to Milan to work a little bit. And while I was back in Milan, I had a falling out with my previous agent because he wanted me to leave Paris a lot sooner. He didn't want me to stay in Paris for as long as I did. And I didn't want to go back to work in Milan because I wasn't working. And he got really upset. So when I went back to Milan this next time, I changed agencies. And while I was there, there was a photographer I knew from Venice who I used to hang out with when I was there before. He was a nice guy. And he called me up and he's like, "Hey, Sarah, put on something nice and come over." And I was like, okay. So I put on my little cute dress and went over there. And it turns out he's friends with the manager for Prince. I guess his road tour manager. And they were doing the Sign of the Times tour of Europe. And he had tickets to the second row seats. So we went to his show, and it was funny because when I lived in Utah, I didn't like Prince. I just thought he was slimy, like trying to be all sexy, and you know, I was judgmental about everything though. But I wasn't feeling him. And then when we went to the show, I was so impressed with him. I was so blown away at his talent. I mean, just A++++. Unbelievably talented. Incredible show. The dancer he had, Kat, I mean, she just danced nonstop throughout the whole show. It was so amazing. I got to go backstage. I got to talk to his band, and they were telling me that they used to be do cocaine before the show, but now they're Buddhists and they just chant before the show. And the manager and the producer, I guess the producer for his film, Purple Rain, I think that was what it was, they invited me to come to dinner with them one night. And so I went to dinner with them, but I had to let them know that I only eat fruit, which they thought was weird, but they were totally cool. And I have to say, of all the men that aside from my Italian friends that I met there, they were so non-lecherous. They were really gentlemen, and I had a good time, And the producer gave me his name and number. Says, "Hey, if you ever come to LA, look me up," And I was like, okay, and it was really sweet. And then Prince was he was doing his tour around Europe, and he was having birthday parties at every city he went to and inviting models. So back at Amnesty, the club that I used to go to in Milan, he had his birthday party there. So I got to meet him. And basically, he just stood kind of off to himself and practically in the corner, looking really bugged out the whole time. I mean, just kind of like fascinated, but shy, kind of bugged out. And that was my experience with Prince. And then, well, so I went back to Munich at one point. I had a dream that Joe showed me the ring. He got his girlfriend pregnant and he was going to get married. And I had that dream. And within a short time, within a week, I ran into one of his friends who told me, yeah, Joe just got married. And so kind of my heart sank and I lost my desire to really be there in Europe anymore. And then I went to Tokyo to model. And Tokyo is a place where you could make a lot of money in a short time. And I was ridiculously thin by this time. Like my hip bones were just popping out. And I was getting more and more fanatical with my diet, just cutting out. I cut out nuts and avocados, which is really the only reason I had any weight on me at all was because I was eating nuts and avocados. And in Tokyo, it was the runway season. So I was there to do the runway shows, and runway shows in Tokyo, probably, I don't know, maybe it's the same now, but they're pretty bizarre. I mean, like it's like you wear costumes more than clothes, just really wild out there stuff. And they loved how anorexic I was. So I did the runway shows in Tokyo. I also did a lot of print, and it was interesting because they didn't like the fact that I had straight hair and dark skin, so they'd paint me really pale and curl my hair so I didn't look too Japanese. And something I really found fascinating while I was there is that kids, they send their kids to school in the wintertime in shorts because it conditions them to the cold. And they also have a lot of hot springs there, and people do, I mean, it's a big part of the culture, but the water is so hot it will actually break your blood vessels. And I did some trips. I went to an island called Ishigeki, and that was really weird for me because at that point in my life I had never seen an Asian person on a tropical island except for in like Vietnam films. So that was strange. And then when I left Ishigeki, I had to stop at Okinawa, and I walked around Okinawa for a while, and that I found very strange too, because they had a lot of American military souvenir shops there where they're selling little hand grenade souvenirs and all this American military souvenir stuff. And that just seemed really weird to me. Like, I didn't get it. But fruit was really expensive in Tokyo, really expensive. I mean, well, at the time, you paying $1 for an apple seemed a lot, but now, I mean, that's just normal to pay $1 for an organic apple. That can happen very easily as well. But we're talking 1987, so a really, really long time ago. By the time I left Tokyo, I had, and I did not love it there. It was just more American than America as far as I was concerned, as far as all the technology and the neon lights and all the commercialism, and so expensive. And I thought it was interesting that the women had to stand up for the men on the train so the men could sit down. And it just seemed like, and I'm not trying to judge the Japanese because of their race, whatever. I'm just talking culturally. But I loved that they took off their shoes when they went into places. I can't talk anything about their food because I only ate fruit while I was there. But there was definitely a real roboticness about the city anyway. On one of my trips, they had the Teachings of Buddha book was in one of the hotels, so I brought it with me on the job, and I was reading it, and some of the Japanese people that were on the job were laughing at me for reading it, and I found it interesting. I was trying to learn how to count to 10 in Japanese, and by the time I left there, I was ridiculously thin, and I had made, I think, like $20,000 in about a month and a half, and I was 17. And I was so excited. I was like, oh, I could buy some land. And they were just laughing at my agency. They're like, you couldn't even buy a corner of this room for that much, So after Tokyo, I was too thin to model anymore, and I had to make a decision. Did I want to keep on my spiritual path and keep cleansing myself? Or did I want to go back to modeling? And I chose my spiritual path. And I went back to stay with my aunt and uncle in Kentucky, who, they're the ones that started me on the fruitarianism. And my uncle, he was a huge hypocrite. I mean, he would drink wine and say it's fruit, and eat pickles and say it's fruit. And he was the one that really encouraged me to do it, but he didn't really follow it, just, sometimes. And I was all gung-ho about it. And so when I was staying with them, I was working at their health food store, and I was getting thinner and thinner. I was drinking a lot of orange juice, and I think I wasn't even eating nuts and avocados anymore still. And it was getting pretty bad. I got down to 93 pounds. And I mean, right now, I'm 135, 140 pounds. I got down to 93 pounds. And they were oblivious to the problem, and I just kept thinking, if I just finally get clean enough, then I'll start putting weight back on. I was so caught up in my fanaticism. And when my dad found out about it, he was furious. By this time, my family had moved to San Diego. I don't know if I mentioned that earlier, but they moved from Utah to San Diego, and they were living on some land that was, I believe, either owned or somehow affiliated with the guy next door who my dad knew and did work with, who was a big-time Nazi, neo-Nazi. And so they were living on 4 acres covered in fruit trees in San Diego. It was a really rundown place, but it was, something I would have liked because it was very magical, but it's hard having, I think by the time they moved there, my mom had more kids, and I think there were a total of 8 or 9 kids. I mean, ultimately, the last kid she had was the 9th, but I don't know if she had the last one by then. And a lot of kids in a small place, but a lot of land. And so my dad heard about how skinny I got, and he was furious, and he forced my grandmother, who lived south of my aunt and uncle in Kentucky, in the house. And I think at that time she was living in the house that she bought, that I was raised in. And he told her she had to take me to a doctor. And so I just asked, because I wasn't 18 yet, I wasn't a legal adult yet, and I asked if I could go to a holistic doctor or a naturopathic doctor and not to a regular one. So they found a doctor, a naturopathic doctor in town in Lexington, and took me to her. And my life changed because of this experience. She said, "You don't know what your body needs. Your body knows what your body needs." And she introduced me to a technique called muscle testing, where they can test if your muscle goes weak or strong, depending on which food is mentioned. So she did these whole series of tests on me to see what my body could eat. And at the end of the test, it basically said I could not eat any fruit anymore. I could only eat cooked vegetables and like fish and chicken at the time. And maybe there was like maybe some brown rice. I don't remember, but not a lot of stuff. And she put me on this new diet, and I just didn't love it. I really was anti-eating meat at the time, like really anti-eating meat. And I'm not going to kill anything. I'd rather die. And so then I tried this other thing. I went down to the Hippocrates Health Institute in Florida, where they feed you just raw food, and that you do all these watermelon enema cleanses. And I went and stayed down there, and that was a whole trip because the people who ran it were really, really skinny and bugged out. Their eyes were huge. They didn't look healthy. The only person who looked healthy there was the guy who who was the cook. And I asked him what he ate, and he's like, "Oh, I eat pizza." Like he wasn't eating everything that they were eating. And, they were raw food vegetarians or vegans, basically. And one of the girls who was staying down there with me, she was having major headaches from caffeine withdrawals from coffee. And so one day she's like, "I just got to go to town and get some coffee." And I was like, "Okay, yeah, I just got to get some cooked bread," because I was getting really bloated from this raw food diet. So we went into town, and she saw a little Italian restaurant, and we went in there to get her coffee. And guess who's in there? The people from the Hippocrates Health Institute. And they're like, "Don't tell anyone." They were in there eating because they weren't getting enough food either. So I left that experience, came back to Kentucky to my grandmother's. I started growing a garden. I started following more of the diet that the lady at the naturopathic doctor had put me on. And I started feeling better and gaining weight and everything. And then she was telling me, I asked her, "Where did you learn this?" And she was telling me about her teacher. And he was a guy who had a ranch in Texas. And he had had these major life-changing spiritual experiences. He was bleeding out of every organ in his body and needed a triple bypass surgery and was dying. And then he had this miraculous healing. And then he developed these skills. And then he learned how to, or I don't know where he came up with, but he had this therapy that he did on people. He called it a detox. And I wanted to learn it. So I went down there and I stayed with him. I think the first time I went there, I stayed for a week. And he did the detox on me, and he did it on other people, and I helped him. And basically, you lay on a table, you breathe really deeply. He pushes on certain acupressure points in your body and does some affirmations. And basically, it's also called rebirthing. It's a circular breathing where you just are flooding your body with oxygen. And after a while, when you start to let go, wherever you have blocks and you're holding repressed emotions and toxins in your body, you start releasing it. And what happens is, because there's such a really strong charge of energy moving out of your body, that your hands and feet, they just start going like he called it going into tetany. They just start going like this. So my job when I helped him was to massage the hands and feet of the people so it would keep those energy channels open, and that emotion would flow out. And I saw some pretty incredible things on the people that he worked on. This one lady, I didn't know at the time of the therapy session, but she started making all these crazy sucking noises with her cheeks and just really weird stuff moving around in her face. And after the session, it came out that she'd had a lot of really traumatic dental work done. So maybe there was trauma and toxins stored in her jaw that she was releasing. I don't know. But when I finally did my detox with him, I'm doing all this really deep breathing, and then all this anger starts coming up, and then all the sadness starts coming up, and I'm breathing and I'm breathing and I'm releasing and I'm crying and I'm opening, and then I felt this calm come over me, and this, I was expanded in this state of openness, and this calm came over me, and then I felt this gold light. I don't know if I saw it and I felt it. And my eyes were closed. But I felt this gold light come down on me, and it was the most incredible, powerful feeling of love and acceptance and light that I'd ever experienced. And up until this point, I was taught God is a man in the sky, but I knew with every cell of my body that was God, that there was nothing more perfect, there was nothing more powerful, and there was nothing more beautiful. It was the most perfect love I'd ever experienced. And in my mind, I thought to myself that I felt like God just came and kissed me on the forehead. And the guy who was doing the detox on me says, and he was actually very psychic, he says, well, I think God just came and kissed you on the forehead. That just blew my mind. Changed my life. And then I went back to Kentucky.